ch.22. Brian Cochrane couldn't believe his eyes. He went through the totals again, double-checking, making sure he hadn't screwed up. Frowning, biting the pencil, he pondered the results of his arithmetic. Sales were dropping at an alarming rate. For a week now they'd been going steadily downward. But yesterday the sharpest drop of all. What would Brother Leon say? That was Brian's main concern. Brian hated the job of treasurer because it was such a drag, but mostly because it brought him into personal contact with Brother Leon. Leon gave Brian the chills. The teacher was unpredictable, moody, he was never satisfied. Complaints. Your sevens look like nines, Cochrane, or you spelled Sulky's name wrong. It's Sulky with an E, Cochrane. Brian had been lucky recently. Brother Leon had stopped checking the totals on a daily basis, almost as if he anticipated the bad news the figures contained and wanted to avoid finding out about it definitely. Today was 0 hour, however. He had told Brian to prepare the totals. Now Brian waited for the teacher to show up. He'd go ape when he saw the figures. Brian shivered, actually shivered. He'd read how in historic times they killed the bearer of bad news. He had the feeling that Brother Leon was that kind of character, that he would need a scapegoat, and Brian would be closest at hand. Brian sighed, tired of it all, wishing he were outside on this beautiful October day, gunning around in the old Chevy his father had bought him when school started. He loved the car. "Me and my Chevy," Brian hummed to the tune of a song he'd heard on the radio. "Well, Brian," Brother Leon had a way of sneaking up on you. Brian leaped, and almost came to attention. That's the kind of lousy effect the teacher had on him. "Yes, Brother Leon." Sit," Leon said, and took his place behind the desk. Leon was sweating as usual. He had removed his black jacket and his shirt was stained with wetness at the armpits. A faint smell of perspiration reached Brian. "The totals are bad," Brian said, plunging, wanting to get it over with, wanting to get out of this office, Leon's suffocating presence, and feeling simultaneously a twist of triumph. Leon was such a rat. Let him have some bad news for a change. Bad? The sales are down, below last year's, and last year the quota was half of what has to be sold this year. I know, Leon said sharply, swiveling away in his desk chair, as if Brian weren't important enough to be addressed directly. "Are you sure of your figures? You're not exactly a whiz at adding or subtracting, Cochrane." Brian flushed with anger. He was tempted to throw the master sheet at the brother, but held back. Nobody defied Brother Leon. Not Brian Cochrane, anyway, who only wanted to get out of here. "I double-checked everything," Brian said, keeping his voice even. Silence. The floor vibrated under Brian's feet. The boxing club, working out in the gym maybe, doing calisthenics, or the other stuff boxers did. "Cochrane, read off the names of the boys who have reached or surpassed their quota." Brian reached for the lists. A simple task, because Brother Leon insisted that all kinds of cross-indexed lists be kept so that you could tell at a glance just where students stood. Sulky, 62. Maronia, 58. LeBlanc, 52. Slower, Brother Leon said, still facing away from Brian. "Begin again, and slower." It was spooky, but Brian began again, pronouncing the names more exactly, pausing between names and figures. Sulky, 62. Maronia, 58. LeBlanc, 52. Caroni, 50. Brother Leon was nodding his head, as if listening to a beautiful symphony, as if lovely sounds filled the air. Fontaine, 50. Brian paused. "Those are the only ones who either made the quota or topped it, Brother Leon. Read the others. There are many students who sold over 40. Read those names." His face still turned away, his body slouched in the chair. Brian shrugged and continued, calling out the names in sing-song fashion with measured pauses, letting his voice linger over the names and numbers, a weird litany here in the quiet office. When he ran out of the sales in the 40s, he continued into the 30s, and Brother Leon did not tell him to halt. Sullivan, 33. Charlton, 32. Kelly, 32. Ambrose, 31. Once in a while, Brian looked up to see Brother Leon's head nodding, as if he were communicating with someone unseen or only himself, while the recitation went on, from the 30s into the 20s. His eyes running ahead, Brian saw that he was in for trouble. After he was through with the 20s and the teens, there was a big leap. He wondered how Brother Leon would react to the small returns. Brian began to grow warm, and his voice turned hoarse. He needed a drink of water, not only to relieve the dryness of his throat, but to ease the tension of his neck muscles. Antonelli, 15. Lombard, 13. He cleared his throat, breaking the rhythm, interrupting the flow of the report. A deep breath. And then, Cartier, 6. He shot a look at Brother Leon, but the teacher hadn't moved. His hands were clasped together, resting in his lap. Cartier, he only sold 6 because he's been out of school. Appendicitis. He'd been in the hospital. Brother Leon waved his hand, a gesture that said, "I understand, it doesn't matter." At least, that's what Brother figured it meant. And the gesture also seemed to mean continue. He looked at the last name of the list. Renault. 0. The pause, no names left. Renault. 0. Brother Leon said, his voice a sibilant whisper. "Can you imagine that, Cochrane? A Trinity boy who was refused to sell the chocolates. Do you know what's happened, Cochrane? Do you know why the sales have fallen off?" "I don't know, Brother Leon," Brian said lamely. "The boys have become infected, Cochrane. Infected by a disease we could call empathy. A terrible disease, difficult to cure." What was he talking about? Before a cure can be found, the cause must be discovered. But in this case, Cochrane, the cause is known. The carrier of the disease is known. Brian knew what he was getting at now. Leon figured that Renault was the carrier of the disease. As if reading Brian's mind, Leon whispered, "Renault. Renault." Like a mad scientist plotting revenge in an underground laboratory, for crying out loud. 23. "I'm quitting the team, Jerry." "Why, Goob? I thought you liked football. We're just starting to click. You made a sensational catch yesterday." They were headed for the bus stop. Today was Wednesday, no practice on Wednesday. Jerry was looking forward to arriving at the bus stop. There was a girl, beautiful, with hair like maple syrup. He'd seen her there a few times and she'd smiled at him. One day he'd gotten close enough to read her name on one of the school books she held in her arms. Ellen Barrett. Some day he'd get up the courage to speak to her. "Hi, Ellen," or call her on the telephone. Today, maybe. "Let's run," Goober said. Off they went on a mad and awkward sprint. Their books prevented them from running with grace and abandon, but the mere act of running cheered up the Goober. "Are you serious about quitting the team?" Jerry asked, his voice higher than usual, strained from the running. "I've got to quit, Jerry." He was glad that his own voice was normal, unaffected by the running. They turned into Gate Street. "Why?" Jerry asked, launching himself into Gate Street with a burst of speed. Their feet pounded on the pavement. How can I tell him? Goop wondered. Jerry had shot ahead. He glanced back over his shoulder, his face crimson with effort. Why, damn it? The goober caught up to him with a slight acceleration of his pace. He could easily have slid past him. Did you hear what happened to Brother Eugene? The goober asked. He got transferred, Jerry answered, squeezing the words out of himself like toothpaste from a tube. He was in good shape because of football, but he wasn't a runner and didn't know the tricks. I heard he's gone on sick leave, Goober said. What's the difference? Jerry replied. He took a deep, sweet breath. Hey, my legs are okay, but my arms are killing me. He carried 2 books in each hand. Keep running. You're some kind of nut, Jerry said, humoring him. They were approaching the intersection of Green and Gate. Seeing Jerry's discomfort, the goober slackened his pace. They say Brother Eugene's never been the same since room 19. They say he's all broken up over it, can't eat or sleep. The shock. Rumors, Jerry gasped. Hey, Goob, my lungs are burning up. I'm in a state of collapse. I know how he feels, Jerry. I know how a thing like that can drive somebody up a wall, shouting the words into the wind. They had never discussed the destruction of room 19, although Jerry knew about Goober's involvement. Some people can't stand cruelty, Jerry, and that was a cruel thing to do to a guy like Eugene. What's Brother Eugene got to do with not playing football? Jerry asked, really gasping now, really sweating, his lungs threatening to burst and his arms aching from the burden of the books. Goober put on the brakes, slackening his pace, coming finally to a halt. Jerry blew air out of his mouth as he collapsed on the edge of someone's front lawn. His chest rose and fell like human bellows. The goober sat on the curbstone, his legs jackknifed, his feet in the gutter. He studied the leaves clustered beneath his feet. He was trying to find a way to explain to Jerry the connection between Brother Eugene and room 19 and not playing football anymore. He knew there was a connection, but it was hard to put into words. Look, Jerry, there's something rotten in that school. More than rotten. He groped for the word and found it, but didn't want to use it. The word didn't fit the surroundings, the sun and the bright October afternoon. It was a midnight word. A howling wind word. The vigils? Jerry asked. He had lain back on the lawn and was looking at the blue sky, the hurrying autumn clouds. That's part of it, the goober said. He wished they he wished they were still running. Evil, he said. What did you say? Crazy, Jerry would think he'd flipped. Nothing, Goober said. Anyway, I'm not going to play football. It's a personal thing, Jerry. He took a deep breath. And I'm not going out for track next spring, they said in silence. What's the matter, Goob? Jerry finally asked, voice troubled and loaded with concern. It's what they do to us, Jerry. It was easier saying the words because they were looking at each other, both staring ahead. What they did to me that night in the classroom. I was crying like a baby. Something never thought I'd do again in my life. And what they did to Brother Eugene, wrecking his room, wrecking him. Aw, take it easy, Goob. And what they're doing to you, the chocolates. It's all a game, Goob. Think of it as a fun games. Let them have their fun. Brother Eugene must have been on the borderline anyway. It's more than fun and games, Jerry. Anything that can make you cry and send the teacher away. Tip him over the board line. That's more than just fun games. They sat there for a long time, Jerry on the lawn and Goober on the curb. Jerry knew he had been too late now to see the girl, Ellen Barrett, but he felt that Goob needed his presence at this moment. Some of the guys from school passed by and called to them. A bus came along and halted. The driver was disgusted when the Goober shook his head that they didn't want to ride. After a while Goober said, "Sell the chocolates, Jerry, will ya?" Jerry said, "Play football." Goober shook his head. "I'm not giving anything more to Trinity. Not football, not running, not anything." They sat in sadness. Finally gathering their books, got up and walked in silence to the bus stop. The girl wasn't there.